Welcome to Property and Finance by Shore Financial, your go-to podcast for the latest insights and trends in the property and finance world. I'm Theo Chambers, CEO of Shore Financial, and together we'll explore market updates with experts in this field and provide practical tips to help you make informed decisions in the ever-changing landscape of property and finance. Please note that this information is of general nature only and has been prepared without taking into account your particular financial needs, circumstances, and objectives. While every effort has been made to ensure the accuracy of information, it is not guaranteed. You should obtain professional advice before acting on any information shared in this podcast. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of our Property and Finance podcast. Today we have one of our favourite guests that's been on the podcast before, Luke Berry, the founder of Thirdi Group. Luke, welcome back.
Mate, it's good to be here. Good to talk about supply, greedy developer.
Yeah, where the headline of this podcast, or the topic of this podcast, is solving the housing supply issue. And I said to Luke offline before this that that's basically his job title.
Oh, it is.
He's focusing on solving that crisis on the front line as a residential property developer with over $5 billion in the current pipeline in construction. Yeah. That's the gross realisation value of all the developments in construction. Built a couple thousand homes to date, and operating not just in multiple markets in Australia, but even internationally in London. He wants to really challenge himself, and he thought if one country's red tape was a challenge, why not go for multiple countries?
Be careful what you wish for, Theo, but a lot of late nights and look, heavy lifting by Ron, my business partner. He relocated his family there, and we had some amazing partners. So we've been there pre-COVID, to be honest. So that's 5-6 years ago. But yeah, it's tough there. It's tough here. There's big issues in the world with supply. So it's an interesting topic you've chosen. I've got some opinions. They're going to be, many people think self-serving, but the system is a bit broken at the moment. We need to fix it.
So a bit more background on Thirdi. So billions of dollars under construction as we speak. We just touched on multiple markets. Markets in Australia, where are you developing?
So people would recognise us for predominantly Sydney. We specialise in everything from luxury. 29 million and a quarter last year was our highest sale price, and we would have a number of apartments that range from circa 20 million down to 600 grand.
I think I was lucky enough to go and check out that $29 million apartment. That was right here in Carraba Point.
That's right.
Beautiful development.
Amazing. Like the family, local family that's bought that has the front row seat to watching Sydney unfold every day. And I think that, you don't get to do that type of property all the time. We call them the unicorns. But we do have a number of other amazing projects in Rushcutters Bay, Potts Point. I've got the most amazing one forming in the middle of Macleay Street in that Parisian end.
Yeah, I saw that. I think that's one that's being... Oh, no, there's another one down in Rushcutters with Gavin.
Yes.
That's a different one to what you're talking about?
Yeah, so I've got Mr. Rubenstein and his team helping me with that one. And it is it's a beautiful boutique development that's right in the middle of it all, walking distance to the very best that part of Sydney offers. So... we've got that. Then we've got the 600-700 apartments above Crows Nest Metro, 500 above Gladesville Shopping Centre, 300 planned next to Marrickville, and there's a few more I can't talk about. But yeah, we're starting to really sort of build our way into the scene as a capable developer that can do the super high end right down to affordability. For
all the listeners that aren't watching online, that explains all the grey hairs, both on the head and on the face.
I've got, the people see the beard before
It's like a Santa Claus of development.
Mate, I sometimes feel like that. There's a lot more salt than pepper these days, I can tell you.
The pepper's gone, mate. Don't kid yourself.
Mate, you know what? It's been very stressful the last 5 years, and I think everyone's felt it. I don't know about your industry, but there's bright spots, but there is challenges, and I don't know what the answer is to all your questions, but I'm happy to try and solve them.
Yeah, well, in your world, you've really been thrown some curveballs, you could say. The red tape, both from councils and state government and everyone that has a a policy that affects development, makes the feasibility not stack. And you're going after an interesting market. You're doing a bit of boutique and what you call the 300 apartments in St Leonard's. Or Crow's Nest. That's more like high density, large scale.
Yeah, that's high density. That'd be one of the bigger in Sydney because that in total numbers close to 600, 700 on that one.
Yeah, because you've also got a build to rent section, right?
Yeah.
Was that part of the local council requirement or something like that?
No, like when we bought that site, it was actually zoned commercial, and what we're becoming knowing for is unlocking the true value and getting those sites repositioned correctly. So we saw an opportunity to buy that. There was 43,000 square metres of office in Crow's Nest. Like it doesn't need that type of outcome. So we lobbied the state government, worked with the Metro, and only last week we got the approval, and now that is purely living. It's got affordable housing for essential workers. We're really proud of one of the first genuine in perpetuity contributions to the government for a community housing provider. Now will provide housing for 60, 70 people that work at the lower health network, Lower North Shore, Royal North Shore Hospital. And we've really pushed, changes in legislation to unlock that so we can build the diversity of housing above a once-in-a-generation piece of infrastructure being the Metro. It made sense more than having 43,000 square metres of office space that really is turning the whole office world's on its head at the moment post-COVID with no car parks. So I think that's hyper development makes sense. Right now we need more houses. We need more houses for people that can't afford it, which is the community housing element. We need more rentals, which is the BTR. And we need more properties for people to downsize, right size, or invest in.
BTR stands for build to rent for the people that don't understand developer lingo. So I guess going back to my point, so the build to rent element or the social housing, the essential workers, is that because I say social, but we should clarify, it's essential workers being police staff,
100%.
Ambulance drivers, nurses, doctors, those type of sort of public service workers,
Yeah,
right?
it's the people you want living next door to you. Like when you think about the Mater Hospital, the Royal North Shore, when we did our research and our lobbying, there's people travelling 2 hours to get to work.
And they're slowly we're getting pushed further and further out.
And further. They've got to live at the Central Coast because they can't afford to live in the LGA where they work, and that's just outrageous. So that's what we've fixed with that. So our housing in Crow's Nest, as an example, will be partnered with someone, a community housing provider, and that is there for frontline health workers predominantly.
So was that a bit of a collab with both local council? I imagine that would have been part of your VPA, your voluntary planning agreement, and also state government would have been supporting that initiative, right?
Yeah, very much. More government. The council definitely supportive of it, 100%. We met with the council, but the pathway of planning on that one was a SSDA, a state significant development application. So you don't deal with the council level for approvals. But when you present that to the state level, it made complete sense. So there's bipartisan support on that approach of blending in housing. The unique thing about Crow's Nest is we gave that in perpetuity. It's not 10 or 15% for 15 years. So usually a developer gets it back. We made a decision, and we're really proud of it, that we gave it in perpetuity. We don't get it back. And then everything in that TOD, that transport-orientated development, if you want the affordable housing to get your uplift, because when you add in affordable housing, you get 30% more of development space in your allocation of the GFA.
It's an incentive to meet the state government's requirements.
That's right, and you don't get it back. And we think that's the right approach to this type of housing in that market.
So we're seeing a lot of that here. We've been seeing it across the road right now in Walker Street, North Sydney, our old office. I'm not sure if you visited, but we were part strata owner there and sold to GPT, the developer, who then on-sold to Free City.
Yes.
And that development that's been put forward with two buildings, 153 and 157 Walker Street, is a mixed-use development that's doing a bit of all the above that what you just said, where I've never seen anything like it in the heart of North Sydney. You've got the essential workers housing.
Yep.
Then you've got office space.
Yep.
Then you've got a hotel, and then you've got build to rent on top.
Yeah, I know. It's a bit of an eclectic mix.
What the hell is that?
Well, look, that's the highlights that the challenge that we've got. Like for those guys to make that work, they've got to put in all those different elements. They've got the affordable housing in there to get a little bit more GFA that then allows them to get the feasibility to work more in their favour. I think the North Sydney core is interesting because we've done a few things, in this CBD, and I don't think you'll see that repeated again. I'm almost certain that it will be the last residential or living type play in what's known as North Sydney CBD core, because the council's got an opinion that it needs to remain for business.
That opinion by council has been ever changing though.
To a degree. Look, we haven't dealt with this council. They want more housing. Everyone wants more housing, but it's the CBD core they're very protective of. They only want business buildings in there because once you start breaking that up, you can't get it back. But I think that the ripple around this CBD and this LGA, there's lots of opportunities, but there's some good, some bad. Like I don't believe the LMR, the low medium rise SEP that everyone's piling into at the moment is the answer for housing because it's predominantly in really expensive suburbs and you're buying land at records. The cost of construction's 40% higher. Revenues haven't grown. So, you're going to be selling a 100 square metre 2-bedroom unit for $50,000 a metre. That's $5 million for 100 square metres in Mossman. Like that's not for everyone. I don't know how that's going to work.
That's a great segue into the next topic or the next question I was going to ask you, or one of our topics.
Yep.
So we're going to dance across our agenda here.
Cool.
But we'll keep it free flowing. I just want to just touch on something about what you said about North Sydney though. As a tenant and as a property owner in North Sydney and commercial office strata, I advocate for more housing. I don't think the defensive approach of local council by North Sydney of maintaining a CBD type culture is actually necessary because as a tenant and as a person that comes to work 5 days a week in North Sydney, the businesses survive better. The retail businesses that support, where I want to go grab a sandwich or a salad.
Totally.
They're supported better by residential occupancy locally.
I agree. Couldn't agree more. And I think that over the course of time, like other global cities that have got that, that balance of housing where you can live, where you work and so forth, North Sydney needs a little bit more of it. But it's a challenge to get anything approved unless it's through, a pathway that creates more housing. So I can see that this council will be very supportive of the ring around the CBD to get more density because so it can leverage off its existing infrastructure. But are they going to allow more buildings to be converted into housing? It's going to be that would be a pathway I'm not willing to travel on.
It just seems like a natural corridor for high density developments because you can't go build a 30, 40-storey residential development in the heart of Mossman or the heart of Double Bay, let's say, although there's proposals up the road.
Yeah.
But it just seems that it's an area where high density housing makes sense and that corridor goes all the way up the Pacific Highway, in my opinion. So that's the segue into LMR.
Yes.
Let's talk about some of the fundamental supply constraints because I know you're going to have a strong opinion on that. And I'd like to hear what you think is working and is not working from a state government initiative point of view and some of these LMR changes, for example. So why don't you jumped into the lingo there. Why don't you spell out what that initiative exactly is? Yeah,
so that low to medium rise SEP, it's basically, I think it's within 800 metres of a CBD, of a main street situation. So
Main road,
right? So there's areas where it's needed and it works, and predominantly those councils the reason the state government's brought it in is there was so much red tape and resistance to development within some of these areas, right? So
state government stepped in with overarching policies and said, if you're within 800 metres of a main road, you're allowed to do what exactly?
So you can go, you can increase the height, which means you increase the density, which unlocks it for development, basically. So I'd have to do a fact check on what the exact heights were. But,
no, that's all right. Yes, because we're already seeing now some activity. So when did that come in? About a year or two ago?
Yeah, and there's a lot of applications. But my comment before is that it's needed. It's definitely something that's going to create more supply. But the cost the cost to acquire the land, combined with a 40% increase in construction since COVID that hasn't come back, financing costs are higher. All that means is that the people that are buying them, putting them through, getting them approved, they're going to have to sell them for significantly higher rates that I think the market can support. I advocate for, similar to what you said, there's areas that make sense that are on top of or near transport nodes, right? The government spent billions of dollars to build metros. That's where we should be creating housing, because you can live above the transport, you can duck into Crow's Nest Village, and you can have all that lifestyle, and then you can get on a metro. You can be 4 minutes to Chatswood, 10 minutes to the CBD. Like, that makes sense. Does it make sense to build high-rise density at Mossman? No. But I think that there will be a market there, but how deep it is, I don't know.
So then does it make sense, if we're going to start speculating marketplaces, what about these high-density proposals along that Edgecliff Road in Wallara? There's a lot of uproar about that.
Yeah.
Which does have, to your point, that infrastructure now coming in play with the activation of that dormant train station.
Yeah, I think that's a smart play by the government, right? I think that it's there. The government of the time many years ago planned that there could be a transport node there. So, if there's developers that can go and stitch together amalgamated sites that allow them to build density on top of or next to that piece of transport infrastructure, that makes sense.
And they're acknowledging and recognising the limitations of the neighbourhood. What I mean by that is the limited sort of roads going in and out of there for cars to come in and out of high-rise developments or high-rise buildings. There might be 300-400 apartments in one of these buildings. That could be 400 or 500 cars if everybody had a car spot or two.
Yeah.
So they've acknowledged that limitation, and they're, I believe, proposing that 1- and 2-bedroom apartments have no car spots.
That's right.
And are reserved only for 3-bedroom apartments.
Yep. Look, it's all that. Like, think about how much it's changed since we were kids, cars. Like, I've just been overseas and you've got autonomous driving taxis, People may not need cars in 20 years like we do today.
Well, we'll sprinkle a little bit of Elon Musk into this podcast. Yeah. He's proposing that your car doesn't need a car spot. It just needs a charging station. It doesn't need to be your own.
Yep.
And your car can be an autonomous vehicle that drops you off to work.
That's right.
Goes off and becomes an Uber driver and earns an income that day to pay for itself, plus maybe more, and then picks you up at the end of the day and drops you home, and you could just go off to a charge station.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And look, even it's maybe not as SpaceX as that, but even my building at Crow's Nest, we've got 3 cars, electric cars, dedicated for our residents, and the whole pitch is that you don't need a car because you're on top of metro to get to and from work or life, and then if you want to go and hire a car, you literally punch it into your iPad in your home, your little central intelligence of your apartment. You book it for an hour or a day, whatever it may be. You use the car, take it back, gets recharged. So it's amazing. Like, I've got a DA pending for Gladesville. For Gladesville Village, it's 550 apartments. Now, it's got arterial road in and out of the city on Victoria Road. It's got buses out the front. And the biggest argument is that they're worried about the traffic and the congestion and so forth. Same argument. In 10, 20 years, because we're building 12,000 square metres of land, we're going to build something that's going to be there for, another 50 to 100 years, right? So we've got to think that way when we're designing it. That development its impact on the roads during peak is only 2 car movements a minute, right? But we get this enormous pushback from local action groups saying that we're going to kill the roads and so forth. So I think planning's hard. To get the supply right, you get all these constraints, and then you'll get action groups form because they don't want any change. They don't want any dust and disruption. Usually they're the ones that benefit the most, by new supply.
So going back to these LMR changes and subsequent proposals that we're seeing in some areas where development applications have been put forward for a decent development, just because the development application has been put forward, just because they've, let's say, stitched up a few option agreements on a bunch of homeowners at 1.5 to 2 times the real price or true value of their property, doesn't necessarily mean these developments are going to get out of the ground because of that fundamental issue that you're talking about being the feasibilities need to stack.
Oh, yeah. And quite often they're overpaying for the land. They undercook the construction, and they think they're going to sell it for a lot more. And so you'll get through a planning process, and I've even done it, where you've had to shelve projects and you're like, the market's changed or cap rates have changed and it doesn't make sense anymore. So
or construction cost blowout, which at the moment they're increasing annually just nonstop, right? I read a report that I think we're expecting 10 to 15% increases annually every year for the next 4 to 5 years.
Totally. Like I deal with that, as a company, my team are constantly trying to understand where construction is. You've got to have good builders. Like we use Richard Crooks for our stuff. Jamie and his team are phenomenal. Sam and the guys from Decode, another fantastic building partner. Then we've got a lot of smaller boutique, family-run builders like the Gitanis that own Dilkara, that are known for luxury, built $20, $30 million properties in Mossman. So we work with the best builders, but that line item, I think it's 30 to 40% up since COVID, and it's still going up. You can't actually, and I'm talking about my construction, like on some of my jobs, then the price can move 10 to 20 million on some of these line items, and that's your profit.
And so that's naturally, would you say, the biggest sort of contributor to the supply constraints, right? Like that and coupled with the red tape, what do you feel is working? What do you wish there was more of? The recent federal budget was all about supporting housing supply and, directing investors towards brand new builds.
Yep.
I don't think that's going to completely solve the supply issue because of what you're talking about right there, right?
Yeah. Look, I think that, and again, forget what side of politics you're on, I do believe they needed to change some things about housing. Because I'm the guy that's buying the land, that's working it out, and some of the prices I need to sell just to get a return on development costs that a funder will fund. Because it's like a stack of cards, right? It's the industry's built on the fact that majority of the funding that needs to come from banks in the private sector or institutional capital, and they won't put their money into high-risk return projects, right? So you need to demonstrate that you've got a minimum return, which is typically 20% on development costs. And the way that the world is at the moment, those margins, the developer's getting squeezed, and then no one's doing development, so no supply is happening, and then we've got this major issue. So housing needed to change, but they shouldn't be focusing on the buyer side. This is where the government's got it wrong. They need to focus on the supply side. Now, that's completely sounds self-serving for a developer. Let me build more, but I've got projects that take 7 years. So you've got all the economists, all these guys, in a dark room basing their numbers on either what's happening today or what happened in the last 2 years, and they're putting out these forecasts. And the housing that's happening now is 7 years away because we can't get stuff approved quick enough.
Which is why we can also have foresight on, or a forecast, I should say, on future supply because of approvals or applications being submitted, right, on housing. You just touched on something that I want to open up a bit more. 20% ROI. Is that what I heard you say on capital for?
Mate, a good development, you need to demonstrate 20% return on costs.
But that's a good development. So everybody thinks developers are rolling in it and they're building these units and they're making squillions of dollars. But really, you're going through all that headache, all that risk.
Mm-hmm.
Risk should be in bold and in capitals and flashing.
You bet.
And all for a hopeful 20%. You know, I hear out there maybe some developments are more like ends up being 10 to 15 if it didn't work out.
Even lower.
Yeah.
We've got a joke. We've got a couple of projects there should be an award category for the industry that is the best not-for-profit development, right? we would have won a fair few of them over the years because you might get your capital back and your investors get their return and they get their capital, but the developer gets squeezed because we're borrowing money at a fairly chunky rate from our partners to do this. So
see, that's why I say you've earned the job title that you're officially solving the housing supply crisis.
And going grey.
You're doing it not for profit, right? And that's, just sorry to interrupt you there, but that's also why we've seen a big surge in private credit. I wouldn't say purely, but a lot of developers that became mature, let's say, wealthy individuals transitioned out of being a developer to just lending to developers through private credit.
Totally.
Because they can get 10 to 15% just lending to the developer rather than actually trying to achieve 15 to 20% return on capital by actually going through the headache and doing all the work.
Look, it's funny. You get to the end of the project and the sales agents made more than you. and they've had no risk. They've had they've clipped 3 or 4% sales commission.
They haven't had to argue with local council and state government and put all these propositions forward.
Yeah, and look, I think that the issue is, and I can share some stories which would blow people away. So, we've had a DA a couple of projects that are fully compliant. Absolutely. I don't know. I think I shared it on the last podcast with you. And we had to go to court to get it approved. So then you had to pile in an extra 12 months, maybe 2 years of interest because you've often bought and settled that site. You've got all the legal fees, the consultant fees, and it was always a compliant DA. But the council doesn't have the backbone to actually stand up to the minority groups to say that this is the type of housing that is permissible on this site, and away we go. I've got a site up on the Central Coast that could deliver 2,000 homes in the next couple of years in a chronically undersupplied part of New South Wales. And I've sat down, our team sat down with the government, with state, local, the local council wants it, and now we're stuck at this state level. It's privately owned land that's currently a dumping zone for asbestos and old cars and whatnot. So it's not owned by the government. And I've got to give almost 70% of it to biodiversity just to get it approved, right? Now, I'm all for balance. Now, we've put forward a proposal that makes sense, that works, and we still can't get the right people to the table to give us a pathway through planning. I think it's now that we can protect 90% of the endangered species, or not higher than 90%, that it's going to then go into a custodian situation where that land gets monitored by the local local authorities, and we still can't get someone in government to go, you know what, this is a good outcome. It's privately owned. We've got no control over it, but we've got a developer here that's convinced institutional capital to go and build 1,000 homes in a growth corridor of New South Wales. It's an hour and 15 minutes from Sydney. It's 30 minutes to Newcastle. We can have 1,000 homes there in the next few years. And you think I can get that thing anywhere near a pathway to get approved?
It's
a nightmare.
You've got to give that many different reports to different associations. Let's talk about that red tape, right? So you've got an environmental study. You've probably also got you've got to make sure your development, if you do get approval and get it out of the ground, you've got to meet now all these new climate change policies.
Yep.
Run me through them.
Oh, look, it depends on what site. But, yeah, you've got to go through a whole heap of ecology studies. So over 2 years to prove on what impacts on flora and fauna may be. So for 2 years, you need to monitor the sites.
In case you might accidentally make a wind tunnel or something.
Something like that. That's for a land subdivision. You've then got enormous amounts of reports on traffic, on economic reports, like what sort of jobs you're going to create or impact. The list goes on and on. Happy to do them, but when you've got a site that makes sense, don't keep putting up barriers to try and get them approved. Don't make me go to court to try and get them approved. Work with us, and then we will have more housing, and prices will drop down, and the world gets on with it.
Does it feel like, from my understanding, that those barriers are some of the most obstructive barriers to getting developments out of the ground compared to any marketplace in the developed world?
Yeah, it would be, every market would have their own challenges, but I think in Australia
we're up there.
We're going to be up there. We're one of the hardest to navigate this. That's why I'm finding a lot of the institutional capital that want to co-invest with us. We've got a track record of getting things approved, getting them through complicated planning processes. And that's why they pay the premiums they do to work on those sites.
Well, you've got a taste of other marketplaces. How's the planning process in England?
Well, look, it's very similar, but one of the nuances over there, if you're building a tower or a building and it's going to have some sort of impacts on the neighbours, right? Shadowing, you can actually go and meet directly with the shadow plan that you can demonstrate that's the impacts, and you negotiate directly with that individual, right? Over here, it's the whole community, right? But if
you don't need to be impacted by the shadow, you could just have a whinge. That's
right, and you can object to it based on that, right? Yeah. Or you've got to satisfy, because quite often you go through these processes and you've got action groups that form, and they're people that don't even live in the area. Right. Another interesting stat is majority of the action groups that form are people that have owned their property for more than 20 years, have no mortgage on it, that sort of living there, and they just don't want to be disrupted. And they're the ones that's blocking the housing for the younger generation coming through, right? Because it's broken. The way that people assess planning, the time that they take to do it, that's our problem. And I think if I was the housing minister, right, what would be the three things I've changed? If you had a compliant DA that complied with the planning controls and the Australian guidelines, that should be assessed and approved within 60 days. If the council can't approve it, it gets either auto-approved or it gets elevated to a state body where then you can get an outcome. That would be one of the first.
Just to help the approval process.
Yeah. You've got developer contributions. At the moment, we're required to pay them up front. And it's just another thing that we've got to either fund or put into a feasibility then you're paying interest on. Like post-COVID, there was a relief where those developer contributions were calculated and then they were paid at the end. Like, these are small little nuances. But fundamentally it's supply. Like, we've got to get better at getting things approved quicker, so that we can build more. That gives more choice and control on where people can live, and prices will adjust accordingly.
It is a fine balance. Like, circling back to and touching on some of these supply constraints, the problem with being progressive and trying to do the right thing by solving the housing crisis and putting forward these overarching policies like the LMR changes is some people benefit and some people have sort of an adverse effect to their value in their home.
Yeah.
And we're seeing both sides of that from our client base. We're seeing people that have bought a property in the zone and all of a sudden their property might have been worth double overnight.
They won the lottery.
And they've just settled, right?
Love it.
But then we have the client that is on the cusp, that is right next door to the development coming out of the ground, and they're just seeing the DA be lodged.
Yeah.
And now they can't sell their home, or if they do, they have to take a pretty average price because there's a development application that's still unknown.
Yeah.
The outcome is still somewhat unknown. We've even seen, real estate agents being pursued in the paper because of a development being next door to a property they've sold, and They sold the property on the basis of what was in council as lodged and approved, and then a new application came in the settlement period, which turned into a high-rise development rather than a low-rise. And it's so hard for these people that are on the outskirts and just get hit, and that's the balance, right? That's the balance that state government needs to have. So going back to what you'd like to see and what you're happy with what's already happened, it feels like we're heading in the right direction. There's probably more red tape than ever, but there's a change in attitude.
Look, 100%. I actually think that this state government's been brilliant.
No, I agree.
Scully. I think when I look at what they've achieved, they've definitely made the right moves towards a better outcome for planning to get more supply.
And he's having a solid crack at things like the Rouse Hill racecourse. I wish that went through.
Yeah.
I see he's having a crack at that next to the Anzac Bridge there. The
Bays precinct.
Yeah, the White Bay Power Station.
Yeah.
All that is like harbourside development area, right? Like that is right for residential development. I think he's talking about 10 to 12,000 homes there.
Yeah.
He's having a solid crack.
Yeah, and I think that that we need more of that. We need more leadership. We need someone that's willing to take that fight to. Excuse me. Someone that's willing to take that fight to the community. Make sure councils aren't becoming roadblocks to housing. Like it's a critical issue. When I started developing in Sydney, we'd sell a one better for I think $600,000. In Newcastle, it was $299,000.
Don't overstate it, mate. You've been doing this for so long. I swear it was like $120,000 the first unit you sold.
I wish. I would have owned a heap of them. But, look back on the other thing is stamp duties. Like, almost every apartment, there's $340,000 of taxes and contributions that we need to pay.
Yeah, so that's the part I want to touch on once again. That you're jumping through the agenda organically and naturally because there's points that we naturally need to cover.
Yeah.
So I've had people on this podcast in the past that have explicitly called that out as a fundamental issue to getting the feasibility to stack. If governments want to make a tangible change or like something that is actually going to make a significant change to getting developments out of the ground, changing construction costs in terms of taxes, levies and fees, both by state and state government and councils and federal government and whatnot, could make a substantial difference because a cost that a lot of people don't know, which I think it was Dave Milton on our previous podcast that called this out, your colleague that helped sell your apartments for you. He called out that I think it's 35 to 40% of the overall cost of building a unit is these taxes and fees.
Yeah, my numbers are 38%. So the big red, he's nailed it, right? It's just, and you think about that. So you've got 350,000. That's $1 million unit, right? Then you've got about 30 to 40% is the land, and then your construction. There is areas of Sydney that has a negative gap. Like you actually lose money if you build anything at the moment because of these compulsory fees. So,
what's some easy wins there to solve? Like no GST on the trades? Or
potentially. I think that some of the developer contributions need to be reviewed or reduced or removed. I think that we just
elaborate on that. Sorry.
So if you think about some of the Section 11s and so a Section 11 is a local contribution. The Section 712 levies, right? They're 3 to 4% of a development cost. So
it's a contribution the developer needs to pay to local council.
That's right.
Which is the voluntary planning agreement?
Some of VPAs that. Yeah, it could be. I don't know the breakdown of each contribution, but
for listeners that don't understand what that is where a developer needs to make sure that 3 to 4% of the gross realisation value, or is it costs?
Yeah,
gross realisation value needs to go toward a local development like building a new park or something?
Yeah, of the cost, not your GR, not the
Of the
revenue,
cost.
of the cost. So they're like the state housing and productivity contributions. It's a really cool name. I don't know what that bloody means. You've got stamp duty, GST. There's a range of them, but the point is it's 38%, right? And then you look at the cost of construction. At the moment, an average two-bedder is somewhere between $630,000 and $700,000 in construction, just to build. So then you do the contributions, you do that, you're at $1 million, right?
And like only in the affluent areas are you really selling that for a handsome profit of 20%.
That's right. So when people go, oh, you're selling one bedders for $1 million, we're losing $200,000 on that box, right? To $300,000, and it's just broken. So what needs to happen is there needs to be a sit down on what is required in this period, right? When we need just to get housing back, whether there's a cyclical reprieve on some elements, right? Maybe let's reduce stamp duty for 5 years, right? Now that's a buyer side. But similarly for us as a developer, stamp duty on some of my sites is millions of dollars.
Because let's also spell out how that works. What a lot of people don't actually know about stamp duty, it's tiered, right? So if you're buying sites that go above that top tier, which I think is like 5 million or more,
something like that,
it starts going up towards 6%.
Yeah, it's a fee. You just scratch your head on. The risk of amalgamating multiple sites and then putting that together, then having all these fees and contributions on that. It kills feasibilities. It kills supply, right? Now, it sounds like the poor developer that's whinging. Remember, when everything goes to plan, we might make 20%.
You might.
We might.
On a project that's taken 5 years potentially to put together from start to finish.
That's right. And I often say, everyone celebrates the deal when we get the acquisition. I said, you know what, let's celebrate. This is when we're going to celebrate. We've bought the site. Now we've got to actually convince our funders to put some equity in with us. Then we've got to convince a builder to build it at a price that works for him and works for us. Then we've got to convince a bank to fund it, like a CBA or an NAB. Then I've got to convince 100 people to buy it. They've got to convince their bank to lend them the money to settle it. Then we get to the end of it, everything's gone to plan, and then they actually get the money and settle it, and we might make a little bit of money. After the inevitable, we've found a problem in the ground, Luke. That's going to cost $7 million. Oh, there's asbestos in there. There's one of my classics many years ago.
Rare dirt or something.
No, there was a 1930s well at the bottom of a building in Newcastle, and we then had to shut the site down. And the Newcastle University, I think, then had a heap of kids that came out under a couple of umbrellas and spent weeks with toothpicks and toothbrushes and flicking and taking photos. And I get it. We ended up celebrating that. And then at the end of that process, they ended up finding Aboriginal mittens in the bottom of a 1920s well. And then
show's over.
That stopped it again for another 3 months because of the red tape and the craziness around it. Now, I respect process, but this is an example. That several months cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars just to get through it.
It's funny. That reminds me of a story of my Greek ancestry back in Athens when they were building the trains for the metro line for the Olympics in, is that 2004?
Yeah.
When they were digging the tunnels, they hit similar artifacts that were thousands of years old underground, ancient ruins. And initially they stopped and they did what they had to do with the authorities and say, hey, we found some ruins. And because it was such a roadblock to development, eventually they just kept digging through.
Oh, really?
And some of the train stations now actually have the ruins in the escalators behind glass walls, walls as you go down. It's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But anyway, we'll move on because we're just mindful of time.
Yep.
Something I want to touch on is, on a macro lens, like, is the supply issue a little bit overstated, or we mentioned that you can have foresight and a bit of a lens on future supply because of approvals. It feels like we've bottomed out and the supply is starting to turn around in the right direction. It feels like some of these initiatives, hopefully the federal budget changes does push some demand towards brand new housing.
I think that we have a 20-year problem, and I let me do my best in explaining my thinking around it. So the proposed changes to the federal budget, where it's forcing investors or incentivising investors to buy new over established housing, I'm in complete support. Not because I build new stuff and you need to buy it off me. It's that I don't know if you've got clients, or I certainly remember when you buy your first home, you usually bought something that was a bit old. It was that stepping stone.
The old red
ownership.
brick. Yeah,
the walk up, right? Yeah. And you know what? And you've met your love of your life. You may end up marrying them, you may not. But the reality is that's your space, right?
Yeah, and the old red brick home, they had the fractioned sort of living areas. The kitchen was one room, the dining was another.
Built in the 1950s, and or whatever it is.
Terracotta roof.
And then you'd go to IKEA and you'd become a whiz on the Allen key, and you'd buy some new shit that you'd put in there, and you'd get the paint, and you'd buy maybe a big TV, and that was your space. That was not getting out in front of your skis, right? Now, what was happening is all the baby boomers had made so much money, and they'd go and see a financial planner or someone and say, you need to buy an investment property, and they're the ones that would rock up and they'd have $1 million in equity, and they go, we'll go and buy that cheap red brick thing, honey. It's in a good area, Bondi or Wollstonecraft, wherever it is, and then they're competing against the young kid trying to get in for the first one because they can afford to buy it and rent it out. And that's what it's going to stop. Genuinely, that will stop because those people now can't get the full tax benefit from the capital gains or the depreciation. And that's going to work. But that's not going to help today's 20 and 30-year-olds. That's going to help their kids, to be honest.
I love that you called that out, that the baby boomers are the ones that are probably causing that competition. And then the natural cadence of our podcast episodes, the last episode we just did was with a accountant who called out the fact that these baby boomers are half the problem, and that we need to probably tax them a little bit more heavily because they're the ones that have had the wealth creation opportunities that the current generation doesn't have. They're the ones that didn't pay capital gains tax for most of their wealth.
Yeah.
So they've had a head start. So your view there is we're a step in the right direction.
We're a step in the right direction, and it sort of, even if you want to get into the numbers a bit more, is that those kids, that there is a generation missing out, the forgotten ones, that they're in their 20s, 30s, and they just can't afford to buy new, but they should never think they have to buy new. That is our society now, is always, what's the new bloody iPhone? Like, you've got to buy the best, you've got to be looking a certain way. And I think that generation, however, will inherit the equity that the baby boomers or their parents have created. Regardless how much that is, there will be some sort of passing on of wealth.
The biggest generational wealth transfer of all time.
Yeah, and everyone's going to, depending on your family lottery, you'll get more or less. But it's subject to. I still think you've got to get out and create your own, right? I'm not relying on my mum and dad to split theirs 4 ways, And they did an amazing job, my brothers and sisters, to set us up and get us on the right path. But my point in sharing this is that the missing middle is going to be solved by larger sort of build-to-rent schemes, co-living, and purpose-built student accommodation. And there is a generation that they will live through this time where they won't own it. But then mum and dad are going to move on, hopefully move into one of my retirement villages, and then they're going to pass the money on, and then that generation will end up buying it, and they'll be buying a house at the same time as their kids. And I think that is something that is going to happen in a big way in 20 years, because it's going to take 20 years to fix our supply problem.
I love that. Racer, Luke. We haven't actually said that Luke's official name is Racer. My unofficial name is Racer. we have unfortunately run out of time, and that last point you just touched on is a great segue to my final question.
Yes.
And my final question is, if we sat down again in 5 years, what would have needed to happen for Australia to have genuinely improved housing affordability or solved the supply crisis? You've touched on a lot of those key themes, but let's say 5 years from now, what would success look like?
I would say that if in 5 years, if the government pulls the right levers, which is on the supply side, not the buyer, no more first home buyer grants, no more deposit things and so forth, like that just adds to the demand and prices go up. The legitimate changes would be that within the next 12 months, 18 months, that there's been some levers pulled, stamp duties removed, developer contributions are capped and they're put to the end of the project. And I think that there needs to be enormous effort put into more supply, and where there is, and I think we're getting there, the State Significant Development Pathway, or the HDA, right, is working. In my opinion, we use that for Marrickville. We followed that pathway. It would never have got approved, that 300 houses, up to 330 dwellings, 100 metres from the metro.
Which is an overall tax reform or review of construction costs overall for developers to get housing out of the ground.
Yeah, and there needs to be, it's all about supply, Theo. So I don't know if I'm answering that question, but in 5 years, if we do this podcast and we look back, if people focus on supply, on approving it's taken years for our BTR, our build to rent, to get tax reform, right? BTR, or build to rent, is an established way of living across America and the UK, and we're just coming to the party. That is going to solve a lot of our housing problems in the next 5 years, and it's part of the step back to getting it back in balance. That's my strongest opinion yet.
Fantastic. Well, Luke, Mr. Berry, Racer, thank you so much for coming onto this podcast yet again. I feel like it was too long between sessions. I think you came on board like a year or so ago.
About a year, you bet.
Yeah, well, let's not leave it so long between drinks and catch-ups, right? Let's get you back on here to talk about what progress we've made. It's a hot topic, your space.
Yep.
And I'd love you to come back on and share about some of these things that you're aiming and lobbying for potentially.
Good man. Great to be here.
Thanks, Luke.